Viewer beware, you're in for a scare.
You might have gotten the impression in the past that I like choose-your-own adventure games. In fact, if you follow us on Twitter, you'll have seen me sinking a frankly ridiculous amount of money into adventure books based on properties that were popular when I was a kid, such as the Sonic the Hedgehog ones that I've got. But one of my favourite series, and frankly the perfect thing to talk about in this month of spooks, is Goosebumps. I just realised I'm the oh my god, my favourite books girl. I just realised that's happening right now. I'm okay with it. It's fine.
When I was a kid, I was terrified of pretty much everything even remotely horror related. I couldn't even watch Jurassic Park until I got older, which is pretty funny considering how into horror and horror themed stuff I am now. Along with that fear came a fear of most of the Goosebumps related media. I was too scared to watch the show, and for some reason I never really got into the books, except for this one. I don't know how popular these were or how I even got this book, but it's the Give Yourself Goosebumps series of Goosebumps books.
What these books basically do is put you in a situation that would fit perfectly in a Goosebumps book and then task you with getting out of it yourself. Even as a kid who was scared of practically everything, I found this first book so enthralling that I read it about 400 times. I mean, look at the state of it.
These books came with over 20 endings each, and let me tell you, some of these were completely brutal. The one where you end up sliding on a slide for all of eternity is pretty tame, if existentially terrifying, but there are ones where you are pecked apart by giant birds or beheaded by mechanical lumberjacks. How the hell did I even read these as a kid?
Regardless of the terrifying death and murder aimed at children, I thought it might be fun to look at, say, the first 5 books in the series and see how they hold up today. I mean, I think they're still being printed, to be honest with you, but even if not, you can get them on eBay pretty cheap, so it's a recommendation if it works out alright.
The first book in the series, Escape from the Carnival of Horror, puts you in the shoes of, well, you, but instead of being a fat 20-something reading kids' books, you're actually a child. You and your friends, Patty and Brad, are trying to think of something to do one evening when Patty suddenly bursts out that she thinks you should check out the carnival which is being set up on the edge of town. When you get there, you see that all of the rides are much bigger and better than last year, so Patty suggests that you climb over the fence into the carnival to check it out before it opens tomorrow.
This is the first choice you really have in this book. Either turn to page 10 if you want to go home, or page 6 if you want to go into the carnival. I mean, obviously most kids are going to choose page 6 because, well, there wouldn't be a fucking point in playing if you weren't going to actually, do something. But I do find it kind of hilarious that the book literally forces you to go to page 6. Well, I mean, I suppose it doesn't force you could just close the book if you didn't want to play.
On the other side of the fence, you're confronted by Big Al. No, not that Big Al. Big Al is a big scary bloke who at first you think is going to do something nasty to you, but instead he just wants you to try out some of the rides and stalls before the grand opening tomorrow night. That's nice of him.
Or is it?
In truth, Big Al wants you to try out some of the most dangerous rides of all time, including a Guess Your Weight on Mars stall which actually forces you into the depths of space, a logging camp ride which causes you to be attacked by mechanical lumberjacks, and even a reptiles petting zoo which forces you to become the new favourite pet of a giant alligator. Scary stuff. Although there are 20 endings in the game, there are a few different ways you can go if you're actually trying to get out safely. Basically, most of the rides can kill you if you do them wrong or make the wrong choices, but there are a few end scenarios which lead to an outcome where you live. You can end up at the big top for a final showdown with Big Al, you can end up at the freakiest freak show to save all the freaks, or you can end up using a magical failsafe to reverse time if you get stuck and have to do the whole thing over again. All in all, it's pretty cool that there are so many ways for the book to go wrong in the end, as well as several different good endings. My favourite by far is the ending where you save all of the freaks from the carnival and they have to come and live with you.
Escape from the Carnival of Horrors is a great entry in the series. There's not only a bunch of branching paths and choices you can make, but you can actually discover the backstory of the carnival if you go and speak to the right people. Obviously, there's not very many advanced mechanics like health or inventory that you'd find in, say, Fighting Fantasy, but I don't really think these books need that. It's just a ghost story that you basically tell to yourself. Spooky.
The next book in the series is TikTok, Youre Dead. In it, you and your family are visiting New York, and instead of doing the cool stuff you thought you would be doing, like visiting the Statue of Liberty or climbing to the 102nd floor of the World Trade Center...
Ooh, yeah, I am not touching that one. Not even on Halloween.
You're being dragged around a bunch of museums by your parents. As if that wasn't bad enough, you also have to look after your little brother Denny, who really wants you to know that you're not the boss of me.
Damn right, Danny. Little brother's fighting back. You evil bitch.
Anyway, you get asked to take your little brother to find some water because he's thirsty, but being the little git he is, he runs off. While searching for him, you get mistaken for a volunteer in a time travel experiment. Once again, your first choice in the game is whether to go on a time adventure or to go look for your brother first. In something of a trend for the rest of the series, if you choose to do the responsible thing, the book has a go at you and tells you to choose again. When you do agree to go back in time, Denny comes running into the room, and when you tell him not to go into the glowing portal of time in front of him, he shouts, "You're not the boss of me," and runs head first into it. Because he's a dick. The professor tells you that you have to get him back in 2 hours or he'll disappear forever.
It might just be me, but I think this kid's a lost fucking cause. Just tell your parents he fell into a tar pit in the dinosaur exhibit. Problem solved.
Obviously, the book doesn't give you that option. Instead, you have to choose which direction to go in, to the past or to the future, since you don't know where he's gone to. The choice is pretty much a 50-50 split on whether you'll get the right thing or not, but spoiler alert, Denny is almost always in the exact time you end up choosing. TikTok Youre Dead does take you to some interesting places, like a futuristic city filled with flying cars, dinosaur times, and even to a land of kings and knights. Honestly, I'm just less enamored of this one because the first time I ever beat it, I got super lucky and immediately picked the right path, finishing it in less than 5 minutes. I also think that it relies just a bit too much on randomization, like tossing coins or whether the date you're reading the book on is even or odd. Just to be fair, the first book did do this, but a lot less often. The endings are just as gruesome too, though. You can get drowned in quicksand, thrown into a moat, and eaten by alligators, or even killed by a psychotic robot teacher from the future. There are some really interesting endings, as well as the gruesome stuff. One of the oddest is probably the ending in which you get forced to sit and watch George Washington cross the Delaware River over and over again for all eternity. My all-time favourite, though, is the one in which you just abandon your brother in the past because he tried to have you killed in a vat of boiling oil. Really, at this point, I feel like the kid might actually have been a sociopath.
Although there are a few interesting things in TikTok Youre Dead, I just don't find it as complex or in-depth as Escape from the Carnival of Horrors. I will admit that some of the endings are pretty out there, though.
The third book in the series, Trapped in Batwing Hall, has the scariest opening of all, starting at a new school. Dun dun dun. Your family has just moved to a new town, and after your first week at school, you still not managed to make any friends. Hits home a bit too hard. On your way home, you meet up with a kid called Nick, and instantly become best friends. After a little while, he invites you to join the Horror Club, a group of kids who meet up late at night to tell scary stories. Are you afraid of the dark? Sorry about that, I've got a bit of a cough at the moment, I did say, I think. Once again, your first choice in the game is to meet up at this haunted house where they hold the club, or to stay safe and go home. And once again, the book basically forces you to go ahead and do it no matter what you actually want to do. Shortly after arriving at the haunted mansion, you find some of Nick's friends, and they argue about letting you stay because it's not a story night, it's a game night. After they agree to let you stay, the story splits off in 2 directions, depending on if you join the red or blue team. Joining the red team will have you going on a scavenger hunt to try and locate the strand from a witch's broom, scraps of cloth from a mummy's bandage, 3 hairs from a werewolf, and a human bone. If you manage to find all of these objects, you win. Not only the game, but your freedom. As you probably could have guessed, the other kids are different monsters and they want nothing more than to keep you trapped there with them. Your only choice is to search the house to try and get your hands on these items. Joining the blue team has you performing a test to prove you're brave enough for the club. You have to go into the cemetery across the street and catch a bat. After a few mishaps, you accidentally get turned into a bat and have to try and figure out a way of turning yourself back. Of the first 3 books in the series, this is one of the most interesting. Firstly, as far as I know, it's the only one that has such a divergent narrative, with 2 completely different goals depending on a completely random choice at the start of the book. The choice also changes if the kids are actually other children or not, so you can always count on being surprised no matter which way round you go on your first try. Secondly, I like it because much like the first book, it has secrets and backstory that you can only discover by making the right choices, usually meaning that you have to play through it more than once. It also has some of the best endings in the series. There's an ending where you're trapped as a snake charmer for 3 years, and several where you either get stuck as a bat or turn into a monster like a werewolf. My favourite though is the one in which you become a millionaire by inventing your own ice cream flavour, Beetleberry Crunch. Gross.
I like Trapped in Batwing Hall because of how different each playthrough can feel, thanks to that kind of branching thing that happens right at the beginning. I also like that this goes to some really classic horror places. Aside from ripping off Are You Afraid of the Dark, it does a graveyard scene or a mansion. Like a creepy haunted mansion. That's like more Hammer horror than anything else the first 2 did, and it's kind of nice to see them sort of reveling in that a bit more.
The next book in the series, The Deadly Experiment of Dr. Eek, again has a pretty classic horror scenario. You and your friend Sam are going to meet your mom in her new job as the lab tech at Laboratory of the Evil Dr. Eek. The classic opening is thankfully abandoned here, as your first choice is actually a real choice, between waiting for your mum in the reception or going off into the lab to try and find her. The interesting thing about this one is the different things you can find while exploring the lab, like the giant chimp and the various different experiments you get involved in. But the endings, they're a bit more standard, and all in all I guess this is probably the most boring of all of the books I have here. There is a sort of interesting one where you turn into a dog and your mom ends up adopting you and becoming rich by touring around the world with her amazingly intelligent dog. It's sort of cruel really. But most of the other endings involve Dr. Eek either killing or trapping you, or finally getting your own back on him. There is a super easy ending where you can just go back to the waiting room and meet your mother without anything fun or exciting happening at all. Of course, the book gives you plenty of shtick for it though.
Like I said, of all 5 early Give Yourself Goosebumps books, I kind of have the least to say about The Deadly Experiments of Dr. Eek. It's just sort of dull. All of the endings have basically the same theme. There's an experiment going on in which you are the subject, or you escape and go to the cinema with your mum. Or don't go because it's too late. Whatever, it's not the point. It's still not bad, it's just kind of the weakest one of the early 5.
The final book I'm going to talk about today is Night in Werewolf Woods. The story starts with your family going to your regular cabin at Woods World, which sounds like the weirdest name for a cabin camp. Unfortunately, your parents invited their best friends, who brought their son, Todd, along with them.
It might just be me again, but the way the book describes Todd, he always makes me think of Kyle's cousin Kyle from South Park.
I'm big!
Having said that, this first page really misunderstood the audience of the book. Do you think any cool 90s kids would have been reading this? Because I can tell you, reading was not considered cool when I was a kid. I should know because I was the kid who was always reading after all. Ignoring the trauma that this first page brings back to me, your goal here is basically to recover Todd's collection of beauty figurines that all nerdy kids defo had back then because some steroid experiment gone wrong called Sharky has stolen them. At the kids only campfire that night, Sharky and his little gang let it slip that they buried the box out in the woods, as well as telling the legend of the werewolves of Woods World. Try saying that 3 times fast. Depending on the choices you make, you either go off into the woods to look for the box alone, or you and Todd have a rock thrown through the window and get coaxed into the woods with the promise that the werewolves have the box and will disappear by dawn.
Honestly, how much can those beauty figurines be worth to that kid? I'm not gonna lie, if I lost the prized possession in the woods, I'd be like, fuck it! I ain't going into the dark woods alone looking for shit now as an adult, let alone as a kid.
As you explore the woods, you come across some cool stuff, such as a magic-using troll, and obviously werewolves. But some of the distinctions between pages get really weird, like the choice which basically comes down to being able to do at least 5 push-ups. There's also some choices that require you to actually know some stuff about other Goosebumps books, which has admittedly happened a few times before in the other books, like choosing the right slide number to avoid the slide of doom and escape from the Carnival of Horrors. There are some interesting endings on display here as well, as with most of the other books. In one instant, you can get turned into a fish and presumably eaten by a troll. You can also get eaten by a swamp monster too. Maybe this book explains how the whole vor fetish became a thing. By far my favourite ending is where you trick a bunch of werewolves into biting down on jawbreakers, causing all of their teeth to smash, leaving you to find the pewter figurines in perfect peace. Get wrecked, werewolves!
There you have it, my brief look at the first 5 entries in the Give Yourself Goosebumps series. I'm kind of loath to call these game books. What they effectively are is an interactive Goosebumps story, especially since getting the good ending feels like less of a victory in most cases. They're horror stories for kids, they're supposed to have horrifying endings.
Of course, these books do have some problems. There are a fair few times where your choice is completely random, things like going left or right or picking blue or red, which is annoying when it usually leads to death when you pick the wrong one. Worse than that are the times when something completely out of your control, such as the time of day you're reading the books, your weight, or even the odd or evenness of the date, can lead you to destruction. Lastly, there is absolutely no illustrations throughout these books at all, beyond the art on the front cover. While the art on the front is nice, and is universally pretty well done, it would have been nice for the pages to have illustrations here or there. Illustrations really helped a lot of the scenes in Fighting Fantasy series to come alive, and I feel the same could have helped here.
If you were at all into Goosebumps as a kid, I highly recommend checking these books out. The third is probably the most interesting, but for personal reasons, the first is my favourite. I even remade this as a choose-your-own-adventure game on my laptop so that I wouldn't keep, ruining the book. Although, at this point, I should probably just replace it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a carnival to escape from, and a book to rebuy. That I like choose-your-own-adventure games. Left all the books over fucking here like an idiot. Look at the state of it. That wasn't supposed to happen, by the way. I should be more careful with them. One of them's already fucked. I like Trapped in Batwing Hall because I'm an idiot, and because idiots like dumb things. Aside from ripping off that's fucking wrong. Alone in the Dark, that's a completely different fucking franchise. I have the least to say about... I should probably read the fucking title before I start speaking.